on a podcast, 2 scandals. And now Michael Porter Jr. finds himself in the middle of the biggest firestorm of his NBA career. What was supposed to be a thoughtful conversation about the dangers of sports gambling turned into a two-front controversy that has Brooklyn Nets fans, league officials, and the basketball world asking, has Porter crossed the line? At first, his words struck a chord. He spoke with conviction about the risks of prop bet culture and how it could corrode the very integrity of the NBA, especially given the devastating fallout of his younger brother Jontay's lifetime ban from the league. For a moment, he sounded like the conscience of the game, but then came the twist. Within the same podcast, Porter pivoted from a strong stance on gambling to comments about women that exploded across social media, testing dates with Andrew Tate videos, demanding women cook, clean, and be the backbone, declaring he might live single forever unless his partner fits a rigid mold. The whiplash was instant, the outrage deafening. How does one of the league's most talented forwards go from defending women's basketball to delivering the most misogynistic sound bites of the NBA offseason? Michael Porter Jr. has always been a polarizing figure in the NBA, not because of his on-court play, but because of the narrative surrounding him. Standing at 6'10" with a silky shooting stroke, he's long been considered one of the most naturally gifted forwards in the league. But injuries slowed down his rise, and now with the Brooklyn Nets, his career is being judged as much by headlines as it is by box scores. This latest controversy didn't start out as a scandal. In fact, it began with what seemed like a genuine attempt to address one of the NBA's growing issues, gambling. Porter's perspective carried extra weight because of his family history. His younger brother, Jontay Porter, was permanently banned from the NBA earlier this year for violating the league's gambling policy, a punishment that shocked many, but also served as a warning about how serious the league is on integrity. For Michael, speaking out wasn't just theory, it was personal. On the podcast, he painted a vivid picture of how prop bets and player-specific wagers could manipulate games and threaten the NBA's credibility. Fans initially praised his candor, with some even calling him brave for confronting an issue that other players shy away from. Outlets like Sports Illustrated, Nets Daily, and ESPN ran stories highlighting how Porter was stepping into a role bigger than basketball, someone willing to sound the alarm before things spiral further out of control. But context is everything, and in the high-stakes media landscape of New York, where every quote becomes a headline, Porter's decision to open up came with risks. While his comments on gambling felt timely and even necessary, they set the stage for what would follow. By raising his voice on such a sensitive issue, he invited more scrutiny than ever before. And once he pivoted into his views on women, the entire conversation shifted from admiration to outrage. The irony was almost cinematic. In trying to protect the game from corruption, Porter ended up corrupting his own public image. What could have been remembered as a bold stand quickly devolved into one of the most damaging podcast appearances of his career. When MPJ spoke about gambling, he wasn't just echoing headlines, he was speaking from the raw reality of his family's pain. His brother Jontay's lifetime ban had sent shockwaves through the NBA, and Michael carried that weight into the podcast studio. He warned that prop bets, especially those targeting individual performances, could turn every possession into a high-stakes gamble, not for the players, but for the gamblers betting against them. In his words, it's dangerous for the game when fans care more about their bets than the actual outcome of the season. This wasn't paranoia. Around the league, players have admitted feeling uncomfortable when strangers bring up betting slips during games, or when missed free throws get treated like lost jackpots. Porter's message struck a nerve. It was a rare moment when an active player called out the culture directly, pointing to how money could twist the purity of competition. Media outlets like ESPN, SI, and Nets Daily framed him as a truth teller. Fans who had watched the Jontay Porter scandal unfold gave him credit for being brave enough to shine a light on a subject the NBA would rather not discuss publicly. Even retired voices like Channing Frye applauded the honesty, noting that players often keep their concerns private out of fear of fines or backlash. For a brief moment, Porter had momentum on his side. He wasn't just a shooter for the Nets, he was a whistleblower warning about cracks forming in the foundation of the NBA. But the applause didn't last. What began as a sharp critique of gambling's growing influence suddenly veered into territory that ignited outrage far beyond the basketball court. In the very same podcast, MPJ pivoted from discussing NBA integrity to explaining how he tests women. He dates by showing them clips of Andrew Tate. If they reacted negatively, he claimed that was a red flag. The reaction online was instant. Fans and journalists clipped the segment and pushed it across social media, where it racked up millions of views in hours. Here was an NBA player, fresh off condemning the dangers of gambling, openly aligning himself with one of the most polarizing internet personalities alive. Tate, infamous for his misogynistic rhetoric, is a figure many in sports and entertainment circles avoid mentioning altogether. But Porter embraced him as a litmus test. And he didn't stop there. He went on to describe his ideal partner in terms that many felt belonged to another era. According to Porter, women should cook, clean, and be the backbone. He even admitted that he might choose to live single forever if he couldn't find a woman who fit his traditional mold. To make matters worse, he delivered these comments with a casual, almost joking tone, an attitude that made his words land even harder. Yahoo Sports and Yardbarker quickly picked up the story, labeling the comments as tone-deaf and damaging. Fans who had once admired Porter's advocacy for women's basketball, especially his public support for the WNBA, called out the hypocrisy. How could someone champion the women's game one moment and then diminish women's roles the next? The contradictions cut deep. Players and former pros weighed in too. Some said he needed a public relations team to step in immediately before the fallout worsened. Others argued that the podcast revealed who Porter really is when the cameras aren't focused on the hardwood. Channing Frye, who has become a respected analyst since retiring, bluntly remarked that Porter just handed his critics ammunition and warned that in today's NBA media cycle, you don't get second chances with remarks like these. What made the controversy sting even more was the whiplash effect. Moments earlier, Porter was earning praise for taking a principled stand on gambling. Then, in the blink of an eye, he undermined his credibility with remarks that many labeled misogynistic. It wasn't just one bad soundbite, it was a collapse of messaging that left fans wondering who the real MPJ is. The fallout was swift and merciless. Within hours of the podcast airing, clips of MPJ's remarks flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Some users turned his words into memes. Others spliced them alongside Andrew Tate footage to highlight the similarity in tone. What had begun as an important discussion on gambling was now buried beneath a tidal wave of backlash over gender and respect. Fans called for the Brooklyn Nets to suspend him, while others demanded an official apology. A Change.org petition began circulating, asking the NBA to fine him for conduct detrimental to the league's image. On Reddit's NBA forums, one post titled MPJ really said this racked up thousands of comments in less than a day, with many fans saying they had lost all respect for him. Media outlets piled on. Yahoo Sports described his words as a shocking contradiction from a player who once boosted women's hoops. Yardbarker noted that Porter's casual tone suggested he didn't understand the gravity of what he was saying. ESPN's morning shows debated whether his comments were simply immature or truly reflective of deeper beliefs. The consensus was clear. Porter had crossed a line. Former players also joined the conversation. Richard Jefferson called the comments unnecessary self-sabotage and pointed out how quickly an athlete's reputation can collapse in the age of social media. Channing Frye, who had already cautioned Porter about the gambling remarks, doubled down, arguing that this was a crisis only a strong PR team could manage. Meanwhile, the silence from corporate sponsors spoke volumes. Brands tied to the Nets have historically acted fast when players step into controversy, and although no statements were made, insiders suggested endorsements could be on hold until Porter addressed the backlash directly in New York, where the media spotlight never dims. Even the Nets organization found itself under pressure to comment, knowing that every word or lack thereof would be dissected. The real danger wasn't just the headlines. It was the erosion of trust. Fans who once celebrated Porter for supporting the WNBA now questioned if that advocacy had ever been genuine. Women's sports journalists openly challenged him, arguing that his remarks revealed the truth behind his so-called support. The narrative had shifted from promising advocate to hypocrite overnight, and the damage was spreading fast. By the time the dust settled, the scandal had reached its boiling point. What made this drama so explosive wasn't just the content of MPJ's words, but the contradiction they exposed. In a single podcast, he went from positioning himself as a defender of the NBA's integrity to delivering the most regressive sound bites of the offseason. The shift was whiplash-inducing, leaving fans unsure of which version of Porter was real. The irony cut deep. This was the same player who had once publicly supported women's basketball, applauding the growth of the WNBA and calling for more respect for female athletes. Now, he was being accused of undermining that very message by embracing Andrew Tate rhetoric and promoting a rigid vision of gender roles. For fans who admired his advocacy, it felt like betrayal. Comparison quickly emerged. Commentators noted how Porter's situation echoed other NBA stars who derailed their reputations with controversial statements. Kyrie Irving's comments on social issues came up frequently. In each case, one quote became a defining moment that overshadowed years of career highlights. Porter, it seemed, had walked straight into the same trap, and the NBA world was watching to see if he could find a way out. The long-term impact of MPJ's comments could stretch far beyond a single news cycle. For the Brooklyn Nets, this isn't just about a player's bad day on a podcast, it's about locker room chemistry, public trust, and the brand image of a franchise already under scrutiny in the New York spotlight. Teammates may be reluctant to speak publicly, but behind closed doors, controversy like this can fracture unity. On the business side, sponsorships and endorsements are fragile. Companies invest in athletes not only for performance, but for image. A slip like Porter's can make a brand hesitant to attach its name to him, and in a league that has spent decades working to promote equality and support women's basketball, Porter's words create a glaring contradiction. Unless he addresses the backlash head-on, this scandal risks becoming a permanent stain on his career narrative. In the end, Michael Porter Jr.'s podcast appearance became a textbook example of how quickly narratives can collapse in today's NBA. What began as a strong and necessary warning about the dangers of gambling spiraled into a damaging controversy that left his reputation hanging by a thread. In the age of social media, a single sentence can outweigh a season's worth of box scores, and Porter learned that lesson the hard way. The takeaway is bigger than one player. Athletes today live under a microscope where authenticity is demanded, but every word is dissected. Speaking out comes with risk. But when the message flips from integrity to misogyny in the same breath, the backlash can be relentless. The question now is whether Porter can bounce back. Will he take accountability, seek guidance, and rebuild trust with fans, teammates, and the broader basketball community, or will this scandal define him long after his playing days are over? For a forward once praised for his potential, this may be his most important challenge yet not on the court. But in the court of public opinion,